Yeah. Can all the panelists who are going to be on this panel come on down, please? Dean Jeffries. So, that's the first half. That was sort of my journey and my experience. And if you read the book, actually, it goes into a lot more depth in it. It sort of tries to trace the cultural vector as this generation goes into the Amazonian shamanism world. I just met a lady in the audience before who is American, and when she was young, she went to the Amazon when she was in the early 70s with Richard Schultes, and she was involved with Amazonian tribes then and with ayahuasca, but it was a very, very different world at that time. It was there was no tourism. It was literally the jungle with the indigenous tribes. And now, since that time in the mid-70s, like a generation or two later, there is this incredible influx of interest and Western tourism going to the jungles of South America, including Peru, around the Iquitos and Pucallpa, and hungry for an authentic experience and hopefully a shaman they can trust. And this is part of the danger, and this is part of the dynamics. I think that a lot of the people going, we can look at it in two different ways. Is it spiritual tourism or is it a pilgrimage? It's all again in the intent and in the way you approach the substances and the experience itself. So, I would like to introduce to you to my esteemed colleagues here. We've got Mr. Dan Schreiber on the end from Starseed Gardens. We have Darpan. We have Dean Jeffries. We have Becca Dakini and Margaret Cross. Who are we missing here? Maya Waken. You in the audience, Maya? I saw her here before. Come on down when you're ready. Just getting shy. So, if you're here and you've been a part of this sort of countercultural community in this tribe, you've probably heard many of us, or some or all of us, speak at some of these type of events before. What I was really hoping to do with tonight was to really ask you what your thoughts are and you know, what your experiences have been. And so what we have here is some anchors. These are the people that have some deep experience with the plant medicines or with the shamanic scene or with something relating to, you know, the issues and the memes in the film. And I'm happy for any of these people here, you've got the microphones, to start off or have this conversation. But what we have in front of us here is the Byron tribe. And I really want to encourage all of you guys to participate and to ask questions or share experiences. So there's so much density in that film, and there's so much density, not, you know, beyond the film in these modalities themselves. I could throw out a question on start, but does anyone have a question? It's basically going to be like a powwow tonight. It's a group meeting, it's a group discussion. So does anyone have a question or something they'd like to share? Man, you're free.
Firstly, I just want to congratulate you on what I found was just a beautiful, accurate, responsible, conscious piece of filmmaking. So just thank you so much. It really just felt like it came to a beautiful place. Okay, my question as somebody that's joined the DMT, Changa, was I was interested in the specific, in the DMT experiences that you filmed. You said DMU something else. I just wondered if that's a different kind of DMT, and I was just interested in maybe some of the nuance in there in different DMT, like there's different reservoirs, I guess.
Anyone can jump in at any time.
5-MeO DMT, which is what was taken, what Rat took in the movie, is, as he said in the movie, a naturally endogenous neurotransmitter that is in the body, particularly the pineal gland. And it is way more potent in some respects than DMT itself. And as you know, you're in a tiny little match head of DMT concentrate crystal to take the journey into the other dimensional realms. Well, with the 5-MeO, I think it's something in the order of 30 to 50 milligrams for the DMT, but you need something like 15 milligrams, much, much smaller, and it's much more potent than DMT. And in my own experience, it was, I was just talking to Dan outside, and he said the first time he did it, he got way overdosed on it, took way too much. Well, I had much the same experience, and it was like an incredible intensity of experience, a rush of creationism, like creation and destruction. It's a very Shiva type experience. DMT, when you smoke it, is very, very visual. 5-MeO-DMT is not necessarily visual. There are some visions attached to it, but it's more a sensation of dissolving all ego, all boundaries dissolve completely. When he was talking about it, that's all he can really say. And I mean, you can't language these states. That's what McKenna was saying. The difficulty is, why it feels so alien, is that it's so difficult to language. It's so difficult to describe. It's quite a challenge to come back and to try and describe what the experience is. It's something that needs to be experienced in order to be understood. But for those who you want to explain it to, you sometimes sound like a babbling idiot, because you just cannot. It's so beyond the beyond. But what I can say is that it dissolves all boundaries. It's an ego shredder. It dissolves any sense of I, any sense of separation, any sense of form, any sense of delineation. It purely dissolves. And that can be experienced by some people as extreme pleasure, even orgasmic, but by other people as extreme terror and terrifying, all depending upon where you position yourself within the experience. In other words, if you're trying to hang on, you could experience it as a very terrifying experience. But if you're willing to fully surrender and let go, it can be orgasmic, as with most of these entheogenic experiences.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that even within my own filmmaking team, it's been a bit of a controversial issue to try to represent what is a shamanic awakening and what is the sacredness of these substances. And, you know, we've sometimes fought in a way about including the DMT sequences, because the movie is called Ira Awakenings, it is from the book, but it's my belief that the DMT in NDMT usually form is in the brew with the ayahuasca vine. And, you know, it's the synergy between the two, the polarity of the masculine and the feminine, or the visions and the bodily thing, which really work their magic. And in the same way, I think I really feel something happens in a narrative, like in the film or in the book itself, where you get a critical mass of different strands and sort of narrative sort of angles, and it gets a critical mass, and it starts to become cohesive and it becomes alive. And I sort of feel that the DMT sequences do counterbalance the ayahuasca sequences, but it also comments in a lot of ways about Western shamanism, and Ron Wheelock was supplying the 5-MeO, which was completely illegal. You know, at the time, it was only in 2011 that the Americans at least made 5-MeO DMT an illegal substance. After the book, the Tryptamine Panelist, came out and publicised it, it somehow slipped through the cultural firewalls. But it's not even, you know, the substances, it's the approach we take to them. There's been tribes in the Amazon that, the Yanomami tribe, I think, that use the yopo, which is a snuff, and you may have seen pictures of little long pipes, and they blow snuff up the noses of different participants. And they also smoke DMT in indigenous settings. It's their delivery mechanisms, but it comes back to the intent and the consciousness of us. And, you know, are we going to be in the West this same sort of commodification? Is it going to happen with things like ayahuasca, and maybe it's happening to a degree with NN-DMT in a recreational sense, with Changa, I think you mentioned before. I don't think we can, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we need to come back to this idea of shamanic integrity with all these substances, whether it's tobacco or salvia or mushrooms or DMT or ayahuasca. They're all tools for this awakening. So thank you for your question. Do we have any other, Dan?
If I could just add to that, for those who are not aware, there's a process called dark river retreat, and many cultures have different forms of this, and essentially what happens is, if you isolate yourself from all light, after a few days, your body starts to produce high amounts of melatonin, you reset the circadian rhythms. And then after a while, your body produces pinabine, which is from the pineal, and it's a MAO inhibitor. So it then starts to activate after about 8 to 10 days large amounts of 5-MeO-DMT. So this is a natural cascade that your body is going through, and then after the release of 5-MeO-DMT, after about 14 days, your body starts to produce dimethyltryptamine. And so what you're seeing here is a natural cascade of hormones, bringing people to set to their own default and have an intense ayahuasca type experience, which your body is automatically programmed to do. Now, the DMT, as far as I'm concerned, is a much more brain or higher chakra orientated spectral light, much like a modem. It's what connects us to out there to all these other dimensions. But the 5-MeO is really what happens is that setting the stage for the dimethyltryptamine, and what that does is it actually pulls apart all the body armor. So it tends to be much more somatic, and it tends to it feels like it's tapping into the body consciousness. And of course, each cell is conscious, and the overall body consciousness is vast. And so my understanding is, although it's not as visual, it's much more powerful, especially for people who have disconnected from their bodies. So when you re-engage with your body and you realize how much energy is in the body, it's quite orgasmic. And so, the 5-MeO tends to be a lot more powerful for most people in terms of their reaction, even though it may not feel sparkly.
I had a question.
Hi, my name's Ganasi. My question is, there's a lot of conversation around the chemical structure in MTO. We look at it that way, but from my experiences, and I'm sure many others, when you're mixing Banisteriopsis and Chacruna, you're calling in a particular spirit that some of us have been blessed to see. I'm just opening up the question of when you use acacia and other inhibitors, you're calling in a different spirit, and it really takes the conversation away from DMTO and all of that, because you're calling in a spirit ally guide. I'd just be really interested to hear experience and comments in that, from that aspect, because that's where the real teachings come from. The others really, to me, are a doorway to our highest potential, to manifest in this daily consciousness what we experience within the ayahuasca experience itself. Thank you.
If I could start. Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think this is one of the most glazed over topics, which is, these incredible plant medicines introduce us to all these other dimensions where there are all these spiritual beings, and the portal itself, these plants are actually spiritual living beings, and so they need to be treated with that level of understanding and respect. And I totally agree with you that the different plant mixtures were very specific in the Amazon and even throughout the world, all the cultures, is because they have contact a very specific spirit. And I think it may be, it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but it's good to be cognizant that the different plants that we use need to be really measured to whether they are compatible or not, because there are, you could say, like jealousies, with mixing too many plants. Recently, there was a wonderful shaman that came over to drink and brought his medicine, and he specifically said he only uses Banisteriopsis carpi and Chacruna in his brews, simply for that reason, because that purity was a very specific spirit, and it was a very specific way of contacting the luminous.
I think what you've touched on is a very feminine perspective, and I really appreciate that you brought it up. Thank you. It's interesting to watch as these plants enter the Western psyche, and when I look at people who are smoking a lot of Dimitri or working with what we've called analogs. They're often reaching to find something, and after some time, it seems that the spirit of certain plants will call them. And it was mentioned in the film that people are called. It's not an agenda of the mind, it's a spiritual, essential aspect of our evolution that happens synchronistically with consciousness. And I think that that's a really important aspect to know within ourselves as individuals. What are we called to? I pay homage to those who are called to work with acacia. I pay homage to those who work with the Syrian rule, but I personally don't work with them. I'm called to work with ayahuasca, the mother, the vine, and the divine aspect through her. So when I go and sit with somebody who is working with the acacia and Syrian rule, I make sure that in myself I know that they're sincerely relating with the spirit and not just with the alchemy, not just with the chemistry. It's more than a lab experience here. And I don't recommend people put themselves into the lab. I think they need to pay attention to the sacredness and to ensure that they are feeling that attunement with whoever they sit with, particularly with the facilitator themselves and the person who brews, because that affects a great deal. So tuning in and finding out what your evolutionary pattern is requiring and desiring, and dropping from the mind. I think we've done enough of that now. We know intellectually to some degree what's going on, and it's time to drop into the heart and to experience our healing and our evolution in a gracious, inexpressible way.
Oh.
Just on that question, that's a very good point, because DMT is something isolated within itself, but when you're dealing with the acacia or a tree, you're dealing with an entity, a spirit form, and you're not just smoking DMT. It's erroneous to think that when people smoke chunga, they're smoking DMT, because depending upon which particular acacia you're using, many of them have different alkaloids. So, for example, the acacia obtusifolia has DMT, but it also has 5-MeO-DMT, the one we mentioned before. It also has monomethyltryptamine. It also has buffertonine. It also has NMT. So you're having a cocktail of tryptamines, which you can't say is DMT. DMT is one of the tryptamines, but it's the tree that you're imbibing. It's the spirit, the entity of that being that you're imbibing. And so it's erroneous to say that it's just DMT, like laboratory grade DMT, for example. So yeah, you need to address the tree as an entity and develop a relationship with that entity. And that's what you're imbibing. It's erroneous to say that it's just DMT.
Hello. I started my own journey with ayahuasca in about 2004 in Ecuador, and I lived there for a couple of months and had an amazing experience with the shaman there. I've also had very bad experiences with shamans in Cusco around the same time. My question is about, I always felt very safe with the shaman in Ecuador. When I moved back to Ireland, I found it difficult to obviously find someone who was working on the same kind of energetics as he was. He had spent many years growing up in a cave, isolated, to train as a shaman. And I guess I just wanted to hear your views on the guardians that are coming to the West, that are holding circles, and how they view the responsibility that they bring, or how they work with energetics. Is that?
Might be a few responses in the panel, but I'd like to ask Becca, because you've been working at 2 different lodges in South America and Peru. You've got very different experiences from both, and that might help reflect the Western training and what's happening in these spaces.
Can you just rephrase the question for me? Are you trying to understand how you can feel as safe as you did there in a Western context? Is that what your question is?
Yes, when a shaman in Ecuador has trained for so many years, and when you feel that he's working on an energetic level, when he can see things within you and he can extract or do his thing. I find when I drink in a Western context, I don't feel the security. I don't feel that Western guardians are working on the same energetic level.
Yeah, that's very interesting you brought that up. I actually feel the same. I feel very similar to you, and after living in Peru for a year in a Shipibo setting, I myself have not witnessed any kind of circle work or medicine work of the same calibre outside of an Indigenous setting. So personally, my choice is to only work with the medicine in Indigenous setting for exactly those reasons. I mean, after working in hundreds of ceremonies and seeing particular things energetically, such as spirits flying out of one person into another person on the side of the Maloka, and the shamans immediately moving over there and dealing with that, I personally don't feel that that's something that really can be achieved here or in the Western world as of yet that I know of, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So, yeah, it's something that I find personally difficult, is to actually see a lack of such wisdom in the use of ayahuasca, I guess, in the Western world. And therefore I kind of am somebody that stands for the medicine being treated as an Indigenous medicine. Particularly in Shipibo culture, you have to be training for at least 30 years dieting with plants to be able to administer medicine to anybody. And I think we don't quite understand a lot of levels of the training that they go through to be given that responsibility of working with another person's soul, of holding space for them when they're working with the medicine that's opened up the space and everyone within it to the other realms. And I myself, because of what I witnessed and learned, do not feel safe in the hands of anybody but an actual Indigenous shaman. So, and I know a lot of people feel differently to that. I don't know many others actually that hold the same perspective. But I will say that I do also believe that everyone's journey is their own, and everyone's experience is their own, and I'm sure that the medicine is out in the world for a reason. I guess just it's up to each of us as to how we choose to experience that and in what kind of environment.
Just to jump in there, I think the other interesting thing to remember, I agree, and I understand totally where you're coming from. The Western contact with these substances, and especially with the deep training, as we've identified, the curanderos, partake either hereditary route of transmission from in the generations being chosen to be a curandero or having an initiatory illness. It's very different right from the start. But I think in the West, we're in this first or second generation when we're seeing the medicine people in our culture, sprat. We're seeing them put their hands up and take the first faltering steps, and they don't have the depth of training, but they have the integrity of spirit to try because they have the calling, and it may be coming from a different sort of vector from those Indigenous models, because we've had to jumpstart this generation. We've had a disconnect in the West, and it has to start somewhere, I'd just like to ask Margaret if she has anything to comment.
Strangely enough, I'm holding the microphone now. I fully agree with what Becca says, and it's an opinion, and she's seen things, and it's an experience, and I believe all caution should be taken. But at the same time, I believe that Great Spirit has a plan for all of us, and that Washington is part of that plan, and that she herself has her own very clear idea about what she wants to do. I think, as Rod Wheelock stated in the movie, she wants to embrace the world. And I believe that we are the willing vehicles for that embrace. And I don't think we always get it right. But I think, like any great experiment where we are now blending so many different cultures, so many different ideas about who we are and how we fit in this world. This is an amazing, amazing experiment. And all I can do at any great time is surrender myself to the will of the great I am and get my shit out of the way so that I can be the best possible me I can be. Because that's what this is all about. It's not about being a fucking shaman. It's actually not. It's about being of service to the people who live on this planet and the other beings by extension, including the plants, where they're stewards. So I find it helps me not to attach a story to what I do or the work. It's really easy to get stuck back in that place of I'm this and I'm that. Let it go. If you feel called, do it. Trust the bloody plants. Seriously, back in the day when we didn't have ancestors, we had plants. They taught us, get your shit out of the way and you too can be of assistance. Ask the plants, what do they want? It's not our story, everybody. It's just not. And the sooner we disengage our egos from this process and come back into circle and joy, because we're getting to have an experience that 7 other billion people on this planet would probably trade their left liver for. Do you have 2 livers? Maybe not? Okay. As you can tell, anatomy and biology is not my thing. But I know the way to a person's heart. I know how to love and connect and look after people, and I know how to be a really, really good ambassador to the plants. And I think that's what matters. Yeah?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that, and that is, I think it also depends on the person. You know, I think there's so much to be gained from communing with someone who's going to teach you or act in some capacity of healing. But when it's you in relationship to the divine, using the plant as a portal, the plant is the teacher. You don't take ayahuasca takes you, and you know it's a journey. I think if you're looking for something specific and you want that safety and security and experience, then yes, you should go for it. But I think to put it in a box and say this is better or this is worse or this is the way, I think can also be, you know, leading to a cult. Well, there is this incredibly powerful guiding force in each one of us, and this is reflected, you know, in existence.
And can I just point out here, at the same time, this medicine came from the Indigenous people. Let's give back to them and their communities full measure, as much as we can, wherever we go, whenever we can, because we owe it to them. You know, we're balancing karma here. Our ancestors were out raping and pillaging and destroying places, and now we have to be the conduit for the healing that happens on this planet. So give back wherever you can. Come up with schemes. Send it out there. You know, I hear people are buying back big chunks of the forest and then handing it back. Awesome. But ask them first. Don't just come in like the white friggin' conquerors, but actually go in like plants. We have to develop a relationship. We can't do any of this just talking anymore. We really have to relate. So remember, it all came from somewhere, and we owe it. Wherever it is, we owe it. Give it back, and then nobody's going to go away unhappy. It's going to be a win-win situation for all of us on the planet. That's all.
Plants were here well before human beings were here. And often we think we cultivate plants, but there's a good case to be stated for the fact that plants are cultivating us. And in saying that, plants don't know borders, plants don't have nationalities, plants don't have cultures, plants don't have any of those things that are human overlays, conceptual overlays, like borders, the idea of nationality, or even of separate cultures. They recognise a human being and the synergy that happens between that plant and the human being. So it's good to give that respect to plants. And I understand the questioner when they say that they feel more secure in Peru as opposed to drinking here, but I would say there are healers in every country, and it's not to do with what nationality you're in, because, for example, you could say the Aboriginal people came up with the didgeridoo, and you should only listen to didgeridoo if Aboriginal people play it. But I happen to know excellent didgeridoo players who are also white, and they are just as healing to me as the Indigenous people from where this tradition comes. And full honour and full respect to those traditions, those custodians of the traditions that produced the traditions of the curanderismo in the countries like South America. But if you look deeper into the history of human civilization, you'll find that these same alkaloids, these same ambrosias, these mixtures, these brews were used by all of the great high civilizations. For example, in the Egyptian mystery schools, they used Syrian rue and the acacia to make an analogue ayahuasca. In the Sufi cults, in the Zoroastrian and the Mithraic cults of the Persia, they used those same, different plants, but with the same alkaloids. And in the Eleusinian rites in Greece, in the ancient Soma cults of the Vedic peoples, there's a good case to be made that each of these peoples were using entheogenic brews that were analogues of the same substance that we now know comes from South America. But that's just the most recent induction of that brew. It's been used and has been with human consciousness since the pre-dawn of history in many, many different cultures. And so my suggestion is that if you were to drink this medicine, check out the person who's giving you the cup. That's the thing to do, is do I trust this person? And is this person, reliable and trustworthy and has integrity? In my own experience, I've used ayahuasca on a very, very regular basis, at least weekly. I've sat for 19 years, and I've drunk it in every country that I've been to, and from many, many different practitioners and facilitators. Some that were good, and some that were not so good. And so it doesn't come down to whether the person's Peruvian or Colombian or whatever. It's to do with, is this person qualified? Do I trust this person? And if you can honestly say to yourself, yes, I'm willing to put my spirit into the hands of the safekeeping of this person, then go ahead. But if you feel not to, then don't. And that's especially true in Peru. I'm hearing horror cases weekly of awful events that are happening in Peru as a result of ayahuasca tourism, where now people who can put two plants together in South America will say that they're a shaman, or I won't even go into the kind of events that I've been hearing about, but they're not nice, and they're happening in Peru. And I won't drink in Peru. I only drink with one person in Peru, and that's my teacher who I've been working with for 12 years. I won't go to anyone else because it's a rife with what they call brujeria. Because ayahuasca is a portal to other dimensions, and those dimensions are still dualistic. They still have all the lords of light and all the lords of darkness and everything in between. So it's not an endeavour not to be taken lightly. You need to trust the person that you're with, because you'll face yourself on very deep levels where you may not know the difference between what is good for you and what's not. You need to trust the person. So that's what I would say you should base your judgment upon whether you trust the person who you're going to sit in circle with. Because in my experience, I've sat with people who are able and willing to do that and hold very good circle in many, many different countries outside of where the indigenous roots of it come from.
Hello. Well, I just want to make a comment. My name is Alan, and I really echo what I heard. I really appreciate it. conversations and comments. Really, at the end of the day, it's do you trust yourself? We really have to come to a place of self-responsibility. Every one of us, all 7 billion of us, that's where our purpose here in this world is. And the shaman, I've worked with shaman in South America, I've worked with kahunas in Hawaii, I've worked with the ancestors of this land. I call them all in. It's, at the end of the day, I work with nature, I work with the spirits, the mother, and you really have to just trust yourself and really be in your own center. And yes, then of course you will reflect around you those people that can be trusted. But you have to take responsibility. And everyone's at different levels, and so we find, many of us come in as souls for many lifetimes, and this is just where we've come to be. So everyone has wisdom in every place, and I think the point about the commodification, I really don't concern myself with that because I realize, yes, the early 60s with LSD and various synthetics, they were kind of an opening to all of this, but the wisdom of the plant, the wisdom of the elementals, the wisdom of nature starting to now come in, and it's bringing people to it, but they are now finding that, you can't really fake this stuff. Consciousness has this well in the hand. I mean, consciousness is in control of this whole thing, so it's bringing people to it. It can't be, it's a way to bring people to it at the same time.
Speaking of being brought to it, I'd just like to throw to Dean, who's been a bit quiet. It's because, Dean, we did this quick little YouTube interview last night, but we realised Shamans of the Amazon was one of the first modern documentaries about ayahuasca and about Amazonian shamanism. And you were one of the first waivers. You went over there in the 90s and you did the documentary around the turn of the millennium. How was it in your experience going there before this wave of Western tourism has really saturated the culture?
Yeah, well, I didn't know what ayahuasca was when I went there. I went there to work with a group at Rainforest Information Centre and just happened to be out in the middle of the jungle, and this guy said, "Here, try this." It was a shaman, and a very well-respected shaman, but I said, yeah, 2 days of walk in the jungle, and he tried this, and it's ayahuasca, and you have to explain what ayahuasca is. But just something that came out in your film that I just really loved, and that was at the end when it said that the Quieros, which I also met over there, they don't traditionally take ayahuasca or San Pedro. They see the spirits of the mountains and the universe without that. And it just reminded me of during the filming of Shamans of the Amazon, I met Terence McKenna just before he died, and I was very lucky to do an interview with him. And then a week or two after, while I was editing the film, he came to me in a dream and gave me some DMT, and I smoked it with him and had the most amazing. I'd had DMT before, so I knew what it was like, but this was even clearer and just amazing, and that was in my dream state. So it made me realise what you were saying is that this access to this shamanic reality is within us all the time. These are tools that we use. But I'm currently using another tool at the moment, and that is, like all shamans, they try to, or they speak telepathically with the plants and the animal spirits, and I think we've all got that ability. And my training at the moment is to develop telepathic communication with the whales, that just go past our shores every year. And they asked we went up last year, and wow, we just had the most incredible shamanic experience, just opening our hearts and just being with these animals. And it was like a DMT trip. It was like it was just a complete explosion into the energy of nature and the universe. And so we were able to do that at any time. You can go and sit under a waterfall and you can probably feel the same thing, put your forehead to a tree and it's all revealed. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
That's question. No, I interviewed Paul Stamets, the mycologist, when he was out for Uplift Festival back in December, and he had his own shamanic experience with magic mushrooms. But one of the things he said is basically it resensitized him, in a sense, to this connection of the web of life into nature. And I think that regardless of which sacrament we're talking about, or even if it's meditation or tantra or whatever, it's this ability, as we were saying, to defrag your body and get rid of all the Western energetic crud that we build up and be able to experience the true energetic nature of reality and open like a flower, to the sun and to drink in the energy. And I've noticed that many, many people who have experience with these substances across the board, from whatever modality, often have this deeper connection with nature and often seem to evince in their walk as well as their talk this ongoing sort of shamanic opening and awakening. We might have time for one last question. Let's see. Okay. Wait.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Margaret. My name is Alex, and I got a bit nervous to speak in English and in public at the same time. So don't mind if I make some odd mistakes. I would like to talk a bit about the movie, and I would like to ask you a couple of things from some observations. I will write you some more things afterwards, but I come from a place, I'm doing this PhD research about ayahuasca, and actually I'm looking at the UDV arrival in Australia, and I'm a member of UDV. I've been a member for the past 12 years. And, sorry? Oh yeah, the UDV, it was mentioned in the movie. It's a Brazilian ayahuasca church. It's one of the tags that people have given the group. So it's a church-like organization, an institution. People drink ayahuasca ritualistically every fortnight. So I've been a member of them for 12 years, and I immigrated to Australia, and well, I ended up doing this research, working to do it, and I came here also as part of my fieldwork, I guess, to observe your movie and understand Western representations of ayahuasca, and trying to catch the wave that people have been talking about ayahuasca. I think what we have to acknowledge as well and remember, apart from all of those interesting things that were said here, is that ayahuasca is a very, for me, it's becoming a complex concept in itself. Because, for instance, the movie is called Aya, Awakenings that Resembles Ayahuasca. For some groups, for instance, ayahuasca is just divine, just the kaapi, and doesn't even have DMT. It's all the alkaloids. And then suddenly, and for other groups, for instance, they mix other stuff as well, other plants and other mixtures. And even for those who use kaapi and psychotria as the UDV, the way you prepare it and the way you deliver it, it can give a total different experience from, for instance, the experience that I've seen in the movie. So it's a very broad and complex phenomenon, and I'm sure that even a lot of tribes in South America, they have learned from a different tribe, and that kept going on, and people change a little bit to adapt to the plants they found in their environment, and that's so on. And so I think that's one of the things that those ideas of tradition, and sometimes, not saying that you used that or said that, but some stereotypical perspectives about certain things. And as now talking a bit about as a UDV member, I find it interesting that when you talked about UDV, there was a picture, for instance, of evangelical church, probably from another country that is not Brazil, because it was written in Spanish, evangelical church, whatever. And that I find that interesting because it relates to what I'm saying, because that wasn't UDV, right? And if you, for instance, if you take what is a UDV setting, for instance, would be a bit like this one. We have temples that just look like this one. We have hundreds of people sitting, listening to some people with some kind of experience in talking, and we ask questions and people answer. So that's how it works up there. And so about the movie, I found that you try to balance a bit of a historical background with a personal journey, and sometimes I think that you got a bit in the middle, I think. For instance, you said that ayahuasca is one of the names that people give to the vine, but usually in UDV, that's the name that people give to the brew when you say culture and caapi at the same time. And then when you went down the road to talk about smokable DMT, I found that you went a bit, I don't know, I think wouldn't be something I would show my mother, for instance, if I wanted her to go to my church and try ayahuasca. So, but I'm trying to say that it doesn't, I think it's a complex phenomenon. I'd like you to talk a little bit about it, please. I know I've been a bit.
Well, it is a complex phenomenon. Gosh. The church that was represented in at the start of the film was in Orellana. It's a very little town up the river, up the Amazon, a couple of days up the Amazon. It wasn't Portugal. It is very complex. And as I think what we've said here, we've got many different representatives on the panel as well. There's many pathways to approaching these substances, and just even with ayahuasca itself. And the really interesting thing is, as many pathways as there are now, give it 10 years, there's going to be 100 more different pathways, because it is entering Western culture, and it's going to be run with, it's going to be retrofitted, it's going to be mutated, it's going to be like teased out in an evolutionary sense, and it's going to be made to work for a global populace. And so I fully respect all the indigenous tribes and all the churches and all the different modalities of practice if they're doing it with sacredness and if they're doing it with the commonality of the right intent. And there may come times when the different tribes of entheogenic space or ayahuasca don't agree. And that's going to be interesting what we do with that as a culture. But at the moment, it just seems like there is a commonality and there is this unifying fundamental connection to the mother, to the madre, to the planet, to the spaces she reveals. And I think I'd like to focus on those unifying bits maybe more than the differences. And we're going to have to wrap this up because the Byron Community Centre has been very gracious in extending our time. But before we do, we're going to see if there's any last comments from the panel. Dan?
Yeah, I'd love to just to say that for me the most important part of ayahuasca is not the drinking of ayahuasca, but how it affects in a meaningful way people's lives, how it unfolds after that, whether they go through personal, spiritual healing, whether they are creatively inspired. And so it's actually the culture that unfolds, the art that unfolds, the music, the artwork, the clothing, the patterns, the different ways in which we see the world, the different way in which we have a love and deeper respect for nature. So the ayahuasca is like your finger pointing to the sun. You know, don't get too caught up in the finger if it's transforming people's lives in a powerful, meaningful way. That's it. That's what we're going for. You know, don't get distracted too much in this or that. If it works, it works.
Yeah, I'm pretty much just about to say something on the same lines, which is that we're in a time where I think we can consistently look as a species outside of ourselves for answers, for completion, for tools. And I give great thanks for these tools and for these plant teachers as being allies to us along the path. But I guess I just wanted to say that what I learned the most, I think, from these allies is that everything that you're looking for actually lies within you, and all the tools are internal. There is no external thing, there is no medicine, no plant, nothing outside of yourself that will give you the answers you're looking for. Is in you. So, something I always say is that the tools lie within you, and life is a ceremony. So, I'll finish with that.
Yeah, I just want to say, go with God, everybody. Be really good. Stop being so serious about everything. Have some fun. The plants like to have fun too, okay? We can just be with them now. We don't have to make it so freaking complicated anymore. Go and be with your other selves, even if they've got spiky bits that poke into you and they taste like crap when you drink them.
Maya, last thoughts?
I just want to emphasise the discussion on what we do in between ceremonies, and I really think that that is the larger ceremony that is, we're evolving to focus upon now. And for us collectively to see, as Dabha mentioned, that there are no borders, that we are one people on one planet, and that we are gifted enough to know that how we behave in our daily lives, the chop wood carry water, part of our existence, is the ultimate gift to healing and the planet surviving for future generations, not just struggling to survive but thriving. And how we hold ourselves and walk consciously upon this earth, how we communicate and how we integrate the teachings from the plants is really an extraordinary opportunity for us to make large effect on the way humans have impacted life on planet Earth.
So Dean, any last thoughts?
Yeah, last thoughts is congratulations and well done, Represent, on a fabulous contribution to it.
When the film finished, they cut off the credits because they go for 5 minutes. But your beautiful song, the Peace Invocation, is right there at the end, and we missed it. Yeah, there's a few 2 and 3 things that, I don't know if you want to just a little bit of a song or something to send us out. What do you think, man? All right. Just the last comment to round it off. What do you think?
Be well, have fun as well.
All right, Byron Bay, thank you so much. Please check us out on Facebook. We've got a facebook.com/Ira Awakenings. Keep in contact. We're going to be taking this movie out to the world, and we would love your support to help seed it and to support it and keep in touch when the DVD is finally released. But thank you so much for coming. Thanks to all my panelists, and thanks to Madre and all the spirits who are here with us tonight.
Thanks, Raj.